and welcome back to my channel. If you're new, I just want to say, hey, my name is Lara and this channel is all about productive living and living a life that is by your own design. So we talk a lot here about minimalism, about simple living, about intentional living, and all of that goodness. So if that sounds like something you're keen to get on board with, feel free to subscribe, ring the bell so you're notified, and we can hang out some more. Last week I did a video about the upsides of living small, and I thought that it would be very one-sided of me to not also include some of the downsides of living small, because yes, of course, there are some. Without further ado, let's jump straight into it. Number one of the biggest downsides of living small and living as a minimalist is that mess can actually accumulate very quickly. Because you have a small space, leaving a book or two around makes your entire living room look a lot more messy than if you had a massive space and a couple of books laying around. It does make it easier to clean, but it also does make it a lot easier to look messy. By that same token, one of the things when we were looking at living small that we saw a lot of feedback on is that floors get dirty very quickly. Absolute fact. Because you have such a small floor, dirt doesn't really get spread out as much as it does in big houses, so you can see it accumulate very, very quickly. To kind of help us combat that when we decided to move into a small space, we did invest in a robot vacuum cleaner, which Kobe doesn't always love and sometimes fights with. But we found that to be so helpful because we can just run it and it'll do its own thing, rather than sweep up a couple of times a week. Number two is that entertaining people can actually be quite a process. When we bought this place, considering that and that we love having people over, we had the courtyard, which was a huge draw card. So when we want to have people over, we often have people over outside. The only downside, of course, is when it's like it currently is, raining. Which is why we have the extending table, which I kind of showed you a sneak preview of in our house tour video. So this can extend out quite large, but we have to pull it out of the space it's in, into the main space, rearrange where our couch is so that it will fit in here. Knowing that we were going to invest in that, we kind of kept the upstairs as what we would use for the majority of the time, not having guests over. Our everyday life structure. And then it gets moved around a bit for when people come in. So this is a little bit of a process to get organized, and yes, you do need to think about setting it up and packing it down at the end of every time you have people over. So if this was you constantly had people over, maybe it would be problematic. We don't have people over enough that we're like, ugh, we have to get the thing out again. Gah. And really, we only use the table inside if we're playing board games. Again, cut to our tour video with our insane amount of board games we own. While we're on the topic of guests, it's not just guests coming over and entertaining people, it's also guests coming to stay with us. Again, we made an active choice to turn our spare room not into a bedroom, but into an office and a games room. And that was because that's what we use the majority of the time in our lives. We discovered in our last place, we had a spare room set up entirely as a bedroom, and it was used 10 times a year. So we opted to kind of have this space instead, but because we do have a small apartment, it does mean that when people come to stay, they do stay in quite a small place that's kind of cluttered with the air mattress in there. Next on the list is weird people judgment. Absolutely a downside of living small. We still live very much in a society where people assume bigger is better and more is better. So there are a lot of times where people will say random offhand snide comments, or will say things like, oh, it's amazing, but I could never live like that. Implying that you somehow have a life that's less fulfilling, which is strange. It's a very strange response to have from people. But again, we love it. Having this space allows us to do so much more with our life, as opposed to having so many more things in our life. So the thing I preach the most here on my channel is that life should be designed to suit you. Your life, your space, your things, the way you operate should operate to suit the person you are. Don't just kind of follow life according to someone else's script, because you'll never be happy that way. So if living small is following that script, great. But if it isn't, then find the script that suits you. But also, maybe don't judge other people's scripts just because yours is different. Number 5 is that when you have the house closed up, like when it's raining, for example, it gets really hot really fast. which is gonna be great in winter. I'm gonna love that in winter. But unfortunately, in summer, currently at the moment, I am sweating because I've closed up the house because of noise pollution. I'm trying to get good sound for y'all. And it is stuffy, which unfortunately means we do use the aircon a lot, which I'm not super stoked about and would love to find a way to avoid that. It's simply that two sides of our house, this side and that side, doesn't have windows in it because we back on either side of these walls to other people's apartments. So it means we don't really get a cross breeze that would air the house out that much. Next on the list, on that same note, is that because we don't have windows on that side of the house, it can get very dark very fast. One of the major changes that I want to do to our apartment when we get money and time, which will take a minute, is to put a skylight in the kitchen, so then we have light coming through at that end of the house that's entirely natural, and hopefully we'll have to use our above lights less, and our plants that are inside will also like it a bit more. Next on the list of stuff that we discovered when we moved into a small space only really happened because of COVID. I work from home, so having a desk dedicated to me is great. Alex on weekends and when he's home is also a writer, so having time for him to work there, usually when I'm not working there, sounded great. One desk, all we need. Then lockdown came around, and Alex needed to bring his work computer home, which is big and bulky and had to sit on that desk, which left no space for my laptop and me working at that desk. So our house is not so much suited to have two workspaces in it. Definite downside of our small space. Next on the list is of course the most obvious one, which is storage. When you're in a small space, you don't have that much storage. So you have to be very clever about how you use storage. So this is things like you need to be very, very organized. You need to think very much about stuff that you can let go of. You need to think very hard about the things that you bring in. This is something that I actually thrive on, but there have been a few times where I've kind of gone, I would love to get that, but I can't, it won't fit. Or I'll have to think about letting go of something before something else can come in. Again, this makes me shop less, but sometimes it can be a little bit frustrating. So if you are thinking of downsizing, if you are thinking of living minimal, there are of course going to be downsides to it that you need to consider. But last week, if you haven't watched it already, I did a video about the upsides of it because there are plenty of those too. The most important thing is that you're living a life and a lifestyle that suits you. So if downsizing doesn't suit you, don't do it. If it does and you think you're going to get value out of it, give it a try. The one thing that I would say, which I think a lot of people make mistakes of, is they get rid of everything first and then realize they could have used some of that stuff back. So if you are thinking of downsizing, I would recommend using the minimalist method of doing a kind of 30-day declutter of things, slowly decluttering. I've done a bunch of declutter videos if you need a bit of inspo there as well. Or doing something like a packing party, where you package up everything in your house and you only unpack the things that you are using, the things that you think of, the things that you need. And you'd be surprised what's left in your boxes at the end of a couple of months. I will link some of those things below for you. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this sounds like something you're interested in finding out more about, or if you want to join our little family. And otherwise, I will see you in the next one. Peace.